Good morning, everyone. I'm excited about this session with Microsoft because they have really taken all of the surveys that you've completed and all the information that you've provided to heart, and they've really tried to respond to all of the needs that you have. But one thing that came out during our discussion with them last week, Maria and I have been having planning meetings with them, was the fact that we were never able to give you a good foundation for using Teams and that kind of thing. We just had to hit the ground running with how to, do your therapy sessions and that kind of thing. So Ria thought it was really important, and I think it's a fabulous idea to be able to lay the foundation for organization of your therapy sessions and that kind of thing, because with that, we'll be able to incorporate the tools that Microsoft has as you move along. So whether you're providing therapy in person or virtually, you can use the same organization techniques and that kind of thing. So you'll be ready for whatever therapy is thrown your way. So we are very thankful this morning to have Jerry Gillespie with us. She's from Microsoft's Education Customer Support Engagement team as a senior program manager. And she will be working with you today on ways to start with the foundational pieces. Libby will be posting at the end of the session the survey for you to receive the certificates for participation. And also there'll be some, a couple of quick questions that will provide feedback about this session so we can share that with Microsoft. And as we plan our next meetings, we'll have that information to go from. So I just wanted to give a special thank you to the whole Microsoft team and to Ria Dyer for helping plan these sessions for you guys. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jerry.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Can you hear me okay, everybody? Go ahead and give me a, all right, awesome. So yes, I'm gonna do a lot of just sharing my screen today. In fact, I'm gonna, in just a second, turn my camera off and share my screen, and we're gonna jump in. I'm gonna do a live demo, and we're gonna just break down Teams. I'm gonna full transparency. I have been fighting a sinus infection and bronchitis this week and fever, so I've got my water here. I am so excited to be here today to talk about team structure, because I think this is the basic foundation of understanding teams and how this powerful tool works. So as we go through this, I want this to be engaging. I want you to feel free to ask questions, and we'll go through and I will kind of break that down for you. I'm going to go ahead right now and share my screen. And just making sure you can see that right now.
We can.
All righty. All right, so really what we're going to talk about today is, when I talk about teams and understanding teams, is looking at between your producer and your consumer side. And we're going to talk about, let me turn this off here. We're going to actually talk about what that means to be a producer in Teams. A consumer in information of Teams is understanding how to get what we need as far as accessing the information. So when our students come into a team structure, setting that up so that they are able to get the information that they want nice and easily to access it. Today, we're really going to look at how do we produce information, that other side, and understanding the components of Teams to create some structures in there. So when we do and look at that, let's start with some introductions as we go through here this too, because I want to make sure your time is valuable. Just a little bit about me. I am a senior program manager here with Microsoft. It's true. I work with the worldwide engagement team, customer engagement team here, but I'm an educator. Come from education, 24 years of classroom teacher, building principal, district administrator. My doctorate is in curriculum instruction, but have really been engaged in Microsoft Teams and products since it came out over 4 years ago, and really been on the journey of how to work with educators to use these tools to support learning for students. So I know when I travel around the globe, virtually now, of course, but meeting with educators, time is the most valuable resource. So I encourage you to go ahead and open Teams if you have it there and are able to. Maybe open it in your browser, another version of this. If you have the desktop client there, any kind of version there, and want to follow along with me as we go through and ask questions, please keep your mic muted unless you have a question. Please feel free to raise your hand and we can come off. You can put it in the chat. I want you to be able to get a lot out of this. And at this time, when we're talking about structures, maybe we can even maybe share some ideas about how you might set up a team and give some others some ideas, because that's really where the empowerment comes from too. And then enjoy the journey. We are all in a difficult space right now, and just the educators that I have worked with amazes me every day. The profession and what we do for students, it's just service industry. We go in this for passion to support students. My sister is a special education teacher for over 20 years. And so her and I together talk often about our life choices and the work that we do. And we just love what we do. So enjoy the journey. Know that feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions after this. You have a great support system working with Bria and Leanne and the team that's there. But feel free to find me out there too if you have questions, and I will help the best that I can as we go through in your journey using these tools. So today we're really going to talk about the basic kind of introduction, basic navigation of Teams. Step back a little bit, because really understanding what the channels and the tabs and really the components of Teams, so that you can get the best out of setting that culture and setting that structure of how you want to maybe set up for your services. And even as you go through, and we're changing as far as models, there's been more hybrid types of situations coming as we go through, and more vaccinations are here and things are changing, where we're going back and forth between maybe remote learning situations to more hybrid situations. Or even in our service and reaching out to students, you might be supporting different students across different rural areas and stay in this more remote area just because of time and travel and being able to reach as many students as you can when you're going through. So we're going to talk about ways to be able to set up our team structures and what that looks like to help be more productive in using Teams in these applications and the tools that Leanne mentioned earlier. Why Microsoft Teams and what is it? And I just wanted to spend just a few minutes here to kind of understand why Teams and really concentrate on why it's important. I always talk about why it matters to education. Teams really can give you the autonomy that you need to be able to fit in that system. There's a flexibility there to using the channels and the tabs to be able to bring in different various tools, to be able to reach different needs depending on what type of system you want to create or build to support your practice. There is, of course, that sustainability factor there, where it's going to record those files, it's going to record that information, so it's going to tell the story of progress. It's going to tell that story of learning in education, and it really has to be relevant. It can be relevant to the work streams that you have. I think these 4 areas and what Teams can really help support, especially in education, make a difference of why we come to Teams and being able to use these systems. So before we jump into the demo, there are really 3 parts that really make up a team in these vocabulary words that we want to understand. First of all, it is the team itself. I know I hear a lot from educators, you have Microsoft Teams and there's a team within a team, and there's just it's just, why do you keep using team? Yeah, it's true. But the team is that unit. It is that combination of that tools, that asset. It is that body of information that creates that organizational information. It is the team where you're going to come together and join in either your students or your colleagues, or depending on the type of team that you have, you're going to come together and have a purpose around that project or that unit. In here, I kind of try to tell people when I'm explaining about a team is to think about that team as a file cabinet of information. It is one file cabinet. I know, and whenever I would move from different roles in education, the one thing that always went with me was the information in my file cabinet, right? All of my files and drawers. Within that team, you're going to have channels. Channels are like the drawers in that file cabinet. It's a way to keep everything separated in peace. It's going to be each level of the information in that team, a way to separate the files, the conversations, the poise, to keep it separated, but to keep it all into one place. And then the tabs are within a channel, and I'm going to go into a live demo and show you what this looks like, but I want to bring these 3 words up just so that we have that first and understanding here. But the tabs are what's going to keep that information within each of your channel fluid. Those are meant to be interchangeable. They're going to be a quick way to access information. They can be links, they can be fluid, they can be changed. It's really a way for you to make your team interactive, to follow your instructional or your practice for the day. And so that's where we want to go through and understand what that looks like in there. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump into live demo. Now I'm going to cover some information here, and I have this PowerPoint that I can send on to Leanne and they can share with you, so you have this information. I just want to give you a little heads up. I've got all these kinds of information here that I'm going to talk about, so that as you're going through here and we have these different kinds of conversations today, you don't have to worry about trying to remember every single thing that I'm saying, that I will send this resource on so you have this information here. So I just want to show you that this is coming and that you have this. But I'm actually going to jump into my space, into team here, and we're going to just come into a live demo and talk about exactly what I was just talking about earlier about a team and the structures that we have here. So if you want to follow along here and jump in a team yourself and come in, that would be great. And then that way, if questions come up as we go through this, I can help answer those questions, and you can see, maybe go along and start thinking about how you want to set up the structure for yourself. Okay. So this is what we talked about when we come into teams. So when we come into teams, and just a little bit of navigation to get that area here, is when you come over to this far right-hand side over here, that is that profile area. That's where you're going to find, of course, your settings to your team. This is where it's all about you, yourself, and the actual application in your program of your settings. That's where you're going to be able to set your notifications. You can even save messages here and be able to find those, and I'll talk about what I mean by that. But this is where you actually control this program for yourself in your settings. So if I come in settings here, of course, I can change my default, whether I want it to look like with the dark mode, either changing the look of it between the grid that you see here, or a list view that just lists the teams that are here. It's a way for me to set for myself in my own settings in the program. So this is where I'm going to find my information, my profile here. This join or create a team is, of course, where we would create a team if we were going to create our team. And I'm going to talk about the different types of teams in just a second, because that's what makes Teams EDU so specific in supporting education. That's very different from enterprise. There's actual structures of teams for education that are different, and they're made for the functionality to support different areas in education. If I come over here, you're going to see some of you may have a filter sign. You may not see a filter sign like this because it really depends on what type of teams you have. This filter comes up when you have different types of teams, because there are 4 different types of teams you can create, and I'm going to go over those in a second. But that's where you can actually be able to sort out the different types of teams. So if I just wanted to have class teams, or if I just wanted to see my PLC teams, it's going to allow me to filter that out. Now, if you do not have different teams yet, you're not going to see that filter sign yet that are there, okay? So as we come over to this far left-hand side, this is what we call, on this menu charm bar side here, on my side here, this is what we call the me space, because this really applies to the individual account user. This is where it's going to be your private chats, your teams that you own, if you have assignments that were there that apply to you, your files, your calendar. This is really about the end user and their space. This middle space here is where we call the we space, WE space. And the reason it's the we space is because this is where the collaboration comes, and this is where the teams sit. This is where the end user and their account settings and their work meets the work and collaboration in the middle of others, depending on how they're sharing their work or working with each other in these different teams. So I talked about when we join or create teams, I want to talk about first, so that before we jump into these channels and tabs, I want to talk about the different types of teams in education and teams for EDU. I'm going to go back and show you how I got here. There's this join or create a team. When you hit that join or create a team icon, it's going to bring you into these different areas where you can actually create a team. And you get the choice of these 4 different types of teams. Now, like I said earlier, this is really specific to teams for education, because these 4 different types of teams that you have here are really created for the structure of EDU and teams. It's different from version of an enterprise version. And they really depend on the relationship and the functionality of how you want to be able to use them, and what you want to do with these teams, depending on the role or the function of what you're doing in education. So this first team that you have, like that you can choose, is more of a class team. And the class team is really a structure that's more of a facilitator learner type team. This would be a type team where you have either a teacher and a student situation. What's going to be different in each one of these teams are the type of OneNote notebook. And I know there was some interest about learning more about OneNote. OneNote, of course, is that digital notebook that comes from the Microsoft application. It is the same as that when I used to teach. I used to spend the very beginning of the school year, I'd send out my binders to all of my students, and we'd all have our binders, and we'd set up our sections, and we would hand out everything and get our binders ready. It's the same kind of concept and idea, except for this notebook is now digital. And this notebook that comes with this type of team in a class team is a class notebook. And that's where the instructor or the facilitator, the teacher, has a notebook that has different areas to be able to share information with their students, where they can see each one of their students' sections and see each one of their students' notebooks, but the students can only see themselves and the content area that the teacher is sharing, or the collaboration space. So as you start to learn more about class notebook, this is the different structure between this class. This class structure and how it's created is meant to have the permissions that more of a teacher over a student kind of moderated kind of situation. You're able to have assignments, send out assignments. It really is that facilitator learner experience. The second time a team that is available in education and really was created for the functionality of education is that professional learning community. This is a team that actually comes with a structure where it's meant to be educators from the team, where they have equal ownership rights. It's meant to be a colleague type of team where you're going to be sharing information. The OneNote notebook that comes with this team is going to be a regular notebook. However, it's a PLC, or a professional learning notebook. It actually has information in it that's based on the educational research from DeFore and others in professional learning communities. It talks about setting up norms, the structures, all that information that's really empowering for educators in setting up professional learning communities. But that's the structure of this team. It's meant to be a collaborative team, meant between owners and that working relationship. Now, this staff team is the next type of team. Now, I'll be honest with you, this gets confusing for people when they're trying to use this team, because a lot of times when we are in education, we see a staff team and we think, okay, we're staff and we're not students, so I need to have a staff team so that I can work with other staff. I don't want to have a student team. When really this is the type of team that is a leader member, kind of a supervisor, teacher type of team. It's very similar in structure to a class team. But the idea is that it would be a principal with teachers, a supervisor with maybe people that they're managing. You're going to still have what's called a staff notebook. It functions the same way as that class notebook that we talked about, where the leader is going to have a content area to be able to share information, have a collaboration space, but each one of the members of this team are going to have their own section, their own digital space in that notebook that only the leader can see, and then the staff members. We use this team a lot, even with instructional coaches, any kind of those facilitator manager type experiences. But it's not going to be the type of team if you're trying to maybe do a committee team, or something that you're trying to do if you're working with other colleagues. And then the other team. This is the team where is that more of that shell that you can build yourself. It's not going to include any type of particular OneNote, although you can add a OneNote. It's really meant to just be a team that is a shell that you can add and add different features. This is the type of team that comes with the enterprise version of Teams that you can build and add in those settings and change and really configure the way that you need to depending on work. This kind of team might be something for committees, maybe departments, work groups. It's just a shell of a team that you can add to. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions so far about that.
Don't see any questions yet.
All righty. Okay, I'm going to jump back into the demo. So those are the 4 different types of teams that we have. Now, if you are really trying to work with your students, and I'm going to actually jump in so you can see what those look like. I'm going to jump into a class team. I'm going to go ahead and jump into this 5th grade team. I'm going to go back to show how I did that. This is my set of teams. I can come here on my me space. I hit teams. They come here. I'm going to actually come into these teams right here. I'm going to come into this 5th grade team. And the first thing you see here is I've really tried to look at the structure and really setting up this team. Now, this is what we called the grid view for education, and it came along when Teams was first set out for education. It was very hard for students to really see just a list of teams, and it got very cumbersome for them. So the idea is that when students enter their team, it really takes everything else off the plate so that they can just see the channels that are involved in the team. Now, this is what we talked about team when I was saying a team is like that file cabinet of information, right? So it's like each one of here, this is that team and we put all of our information together. This top part here that we have here, this is the title of your team. This is like, I can see here, this is what my team is called. And I can see these are the 3 ellipses across here. These are always going to give me more options. When I talk about Microsoft, there are 2 kinds, I always say there's 2 bumper stickers to always remember about Microsoft when you want to get to a menu. The first one is these 3 ellipses, these 3 dots are always going to give you more. Whenever you're in any Microsoft application, look for these 3 ellipse dots, and you can see as I come down these channels, these ellipse dots are going to show up here. They're always going to give you more options. The next one is your right click is your friend, because that's also going to get you your menus and your menu options, right? So that you can see here. One here. So when I come in here, each one of these areas here are a channel within this team. Channels are like the drawers of these file cabinets in here to store and separate that information. When you create a team, you're always going to create a general channel. It's the foundation of every team. You cannot change the name of the general channel. It becomes the very structure of the team. So the general channel is always going to be the basic structure of your team when you're there. And then as you come, you can always then add more of these channels as you come through to set up that structure of your team. So I'm going to go back here and actually create a class team. So we can actually come through this and see what this looks like. So I'm going to hit join or create team. I'm going to pick a class team. So I'm going to hit create team. And I'm going to hit a class team. Okay, so I'm going to name my team, and this is going to be a practice team. See, and I always encourage people to create one practice team, just something so they can figure out the structure and see how it works. And don't like when you're starting to go out and start to build these structures of these teams, I always tell people get your kind of a sandbox for yourself. Create a practice team, kind of a sandbox, and then it's something that you can then transfer over and then create your working team that you maybe want to work with your students. So I've put down the name of my team. You want to be very cognizant and very intentional about the name of your team so that people know what it is that you're looking for. If you ever need support from your IT or from any kind of system that you're in, or even Microsoft for your team, it's easier to have a name that's very descriptive so they know exactly what we're looking for. And so you want to be able to make sure you have this kind of sandbox that you at least the name that you choose, you want to be as descriptive as you can. So I'll give you an example. When we were first rolling out Teams with all of our staff, in that they would name something like 6th grade PLC. Well, when you are in a very large district and you have over 100 6th grade teams, it's very hard to tell which team you're talking about specific that. So as much information as you can in the name so people know exactly what it is very helpful. So I'm going to put, this is my practice team sandbox, and this I'm just going to put so I know where when I did this. The description, you can also add some information about the team. I always tell people best practice here. This is a great place to also add in information about the date of the team when you updated the team. Now a class team, if it's not a team that is a working team on going on and on, you might be something that you can archive a team if you're working with like a year to year, like in practice, you might archive it, the team after the year with the students. However, if it's maybe a working committee team, if it's maybe a multi-tiered, like an MTSS, like a system support team that you're on and you're working with others in a school or in a practice, that it might be a good idea to even add a date every year when you update the information. So like this might be the 2021 school year. And then for next year, when you come back in August or when you come back to school, that when you've updated, you can update that description and let people know. Now, putting the date in the name of the team, that's something you want to avoid because this actually becomes the structure for the team on the back end because Teams is all supported by SharePoint. And so this team name is going to create an entire foundational system of files and support. That's that relevance piece, that's that sustainability piece that Microsoft has. So when you're naming your team, you want to be very intentional and know that it's going to be something that's going to follow and create paths. So I always tell people you want to avoid dates unless it's a team you're going to archive. So for example, my sister, she has a class team and she knows it's just for this year. She might name it the 2021 school team because she's going to archive that team and then start over again with her new class next year. So that's just that in that kind of situation, that works. But if it's a team that's going to be ongoing from year to year, that's where you want to be thinking about how you're naming your team. So I'm going to go ahead and create this team. And I created a team for a class team. You can see here, these are students, and I can add in students.
Jerry, there was a question about when you create the teams, can you make it so that the students can't see each other?
Yes and no. I can, yes and no. And I will definitely hit on that and what that means, what I mean by that. So I'm going to add some students in here and then talk about what I mean by that. So I can add some students in here, and you can see when I add them automatically here, it's going to show these students. I can even add teachers. If I have a co-teacher, then I'm going to add a co-teacher. Right. And so I now have my team. I picked team and it sat there and it said, this is my practice team. Now I'm going to go back to my team so I can see where this team is. This is the team I just created. My practice team, Sandbox SLP. I can see there's my team I just created. Okay. Now that I have this team here, there's that general channel I was talking about. That's the foundational channel. You cannot rename that. You cannot delete it. It becomes the initial structure for your team. A lot of people use that general channel just as a place to put in announcements, share information. It's a place just for students to be able to be in there and be able to access that information, but that channel is there to stay, okay? So now that I've created my team, the very first place that I want to go that I have my team is, remember we talked about these 3 ellipses for this team. I'm actually going to come into these 3 ellipses and I want to come in and look at this menu, okay? This is where I can add my channels and I can also manage my team. I can add a member, okay? This is where I can actually control and have the structure of my team. I'm going to come into manage team, and that's going to give me my options to be able to get to the settings of my team. I'm going to do that one more time if you're following along. I'm in my team. I'm going to go to the 3 ellipses right across from the title. I'm going to hit Manage Team. And I'm going to go into the settings of my team. And this is where I can actually choose my member permissions, how I want to control students. So, you know, your students that you have in there, you want to make sure when you're going through that you have your settings set about what you want them to be able to do in your team. This is where you're going to be able to control your team for your students and the people in your practice. So I'm going to go there one more time. So I'm in the general here. I'm going to go across from the team name. I'm going to go in these 3 ellipses. I'm going to go to Manage Team. In this first area where we talk about members, you can see here the owners. The owners are those teachers. Those are the teachers, right? I said you have myself here and you have the person that I added. Now, what's important to understand about teams is it's about the work and it preserves the work. It is showing the progression of the work, meaning that I can change owners in and out of here. Even though I created the team, it really doesn't matter that I created the team. I'm an owner right now, but I could become a member or leave this team. So for example, if I was in a place where maybe I was a building principal or that and had a team that was here, I could actually bring in somebody new in that different role. So for example, maybe you have an instructional assistant or people that are helping, or maybe you've added a teacher that you're working with in your practice. You've got some teachers that are in with your students that you're working with. This is where you can control who you would add into your team as a teacher. So if the teacher changes, if your instructional support people change, you can actually remove them from the team here or add them as members here. The members are going to be your students. This is where you can see here, this is where you're able to mute your students, which means you may not want them to be able to post yet in your postings. You may want to control that. You can always choose someone you want them not to mute or to mute. And what that does is it turns off their ability to be able to post in your channel. Okay, and that's called muting your students. Now I'll show you where I went again. I'm in the cross from the title of that name of my team. I went into Manage Team. I'm in the member space and I'm in that members, and this is where I can mute those students. Okay. If I come to this menu, this is really where I'm able to add it and add more members if I want to. Across from here, I can find my members. I can search for members if I'm looking for a certain member. I can add a member of students here. I can come over to my, I said, our settings. You can set in here all of the settings for your team. So for example, you can change the theme of your team. We can change the icon here. You can even upload your own icon. This is really where you can choose the settings for your team. Again, I'm in that 3 ellipses, Manage Team. I can add my members. We're going to talk about channels in just a second. I can add channels, control my channels. And then of course I have my settings for my team, meaning that I can pick that icon. I can manage the member settings, meaning if I want them to be able to add apps or delete messages, all up here. This is a class team, so you can notice right away there's a lot of privileges turned off because it's the structure of that design, that it's a class team where students wouldn't have those kinds of privileges. So those are really turned off already. So back to this question here, I'm going to turn off my notifications that these are here. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so as we come through here, that's how you will control those settings and those member permissions, and then go through here. But really what I want to talk about is setting up your team and getting that structure you need and answer that question. The question was coming about when you're creating a team, how students can see each other. So now students can see each other in this class. They can see that they are in this team together and they can see each other's they can go ahead and they can see who is in the team with them. So for example, when we come into this members and we look at manage team, I can see that, Kayla and Stephen, these are all in my team. Now, but I can create a type of channel that's called a private channel if I wanted to have work that I only wanted to have conversations or secluded from that team, which means that I can create a space within my team that is only going to be accessible to certain groups of students. Okay, so when I'm setting up my channels, I have an option to create these types of channels that I can create standard channels and then private channels. Now you can only create up to 30 private channels at a time. You can only create up to 30 private channels at a time. That's even deleted channels. Now, if you need to delete a channel, there is a time because it will go into a space where if there need to be restored after 30 days, that deleted channel will finally disappear and then you can add more, but just keep in mind that you are limited to that 30 channel space. So when we add a channel, I'm going to come in, I'm going to go back into my team that's here. I'm going to come back up to across from these ellipses, these three dots that are here. I'm going to add a channel. Now this channel name here, this is just a standard channel and I can tell. I use a type of channeling system, and this is just something that I have used, and a lot of educators use to help with when they're labeling their channels, is to add a number to help with the sequence order, and I'll show you what that looks like. So when you add channels, it's going to naturally default the channels and put them into alphabetical order, which is fine if that system works for you and you're okay with those channels in that alphabetical order. But a lot of times when you're creating a class team, especially, you might want things in a certain sequential order and you want a certain kind of flow and where your channels sit. So in order to be able to do that, you can actually number your channels, which help you put it more like in an outline feature that's going to keep your channels in a consistent order. So for example, I'm going to put down here 1, and I'm going to title this just announcements and information. I can add a description, what it is. It's a standard channel, which means the privacy here. I have an option here to be able to do a standard channel or that private channel, which I was talking about, and we'll jump into that kind of channel in just a minute. Next. This automatically shows this channel in everyone's channel list. You have the option to show up to 10 channels for another person in their team, which means that when students open their channel, their team, they automatically will have these channels appear for them. So if you select that and I hit add, it's going to add that channel and it's going to show up here. So now you can see I have my general channel, I have my channel that I added here. And this is a channel that everyone can see in this team, who's ever in this team. If I add a private channel, so I'm going to go that same type of format when I want to add a channel. I'm going to go across from the title of the team. I'm going to add a channel. And this time I'm going to actually add a private channel. Now I switched myself again. I switched from now, instead of using a numbering system, I switched to a lettering format to keep my channels again in order. This is just an outline format. This is not something you have to do. This is kind of a tip and trick I always share with people. It helps keep things kind of in order. So for example, I start with A just to follow that. And this might be my group 2. Now this is where I can actually create a subset kind of private space that's going to have a tab, it's going to have files, it's going to have a working space for people in this team that only the people I select can see in this team. So this is where, to answer that question, this is where you can make that space inside of a team where you only have specific students or specific people within that channel. So I can go ahead and I can add that name. I'm going to go through, I can put the, like again, information about the channel if you want here. Now, when it comes to privacy, I'm going to actually change this to a private channel, and you can see what it says right away. It says accessible only to a specific group of people within the team. Now, this is very important. You cannot add people to this private space that is not already in the team, meaning you cannot just pull in anybody from your other service areas or that too. They have to already be members of the team. Essentially what you're doing is you have your team of your students, you're creating smaller private areas and spaces for members of that team to be able to join and only be able to access. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And so now this is different. So when we created the other channel and we created that public channel, the standard channel, it just created the channel and asked if we wanted to automatically show it to people. We didn't get this option to be able to add in students or teachers. And the reason for that is because now we said we've created this private space. We now have to choose people from the team that we will want to have in this space. I can add teachers, I can add students. So if you had a co-teacher that was here, now I have this private channel. I can tell it's a private channel because of the lock that's here. That's an indicator to myself. It's only going to appear in the class for people that are members of that team. So if they're not part of that channel, they're not going to even see it appear on the other side. They are not going to be able to see on the other side. So if they are in the team and they're not if they're not even a member of that group 2, all they will see is the announcements and information. They will not see group 2 in that private channel. I can tell here, that's why I always kind of add that letter system. Again, that's just my tip and trick. Because then that kind of helps me put those in order, and I'll show you what that looks like. Like for example, I'll go into this class. This is where this is a kindergarten class that I've kind of set up here, and I've put in here, and I've got groups of my different letter groups in that. I've added emojis, and I can show you how to do that, just to add some visual cues in there. But you can see here where I've numbered the channels. These group A, group B, and C, these are not private channels. They can just see those here, and you can tell because there's no lock here. But if I come over to this 5th grade team, you can see here I've got these locks that are here showing those channels that are locked in here. I didn't use because I used the numbering system and it took here, it actually took them here, but you can see I didn't have to use the lettering system here, but that's another way I usually will usually use the lettering system to kind of help keep them organized. You can actually create a private channel for staff only. This is something where you can have a great way to, so if you have maybe instructional assistants or people helping you keep data. So for example, in my sister's team, she actually has, in one of her class teams, she has a staff only locked channel. It has herself and her instructional support people that are helping her take some data. And they have that space here where they're able to add in student data and keep files on data. So it's just information they can share, but it keeps it at their fingertips. That too, so you can actually create even these private channels that are just for adults, like for the teachers or the support personnel in that team. You can see here in these lock channels, again, if I'm not in group 1 as a student, I'm not going to see this as an option. I'm only going to see the private channels that I am a member of. Now these other channels, and I can tell because they are the public channels that we have here, I am going to be able to see these different channels. Okay, so I'm going to stop there if there's any questions about that. Did that answer that question about students not seeing a way for students not to see each other in that group?
I'm not sure. I asked Melanie to respond. I'm not sure, but what she might be asking, if you have a group of therapists that your kids that you're doing a group of therapy with, can you make it so that they can't see each other?
I was asking for privacy reasons. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just asking for privacy, just so that other students can't see each other, and for confidentiality. to not be able to share. So if you created a team and shared something, if there was a way for they couldn't see who else was in that team. So I guess there really isn't a way to completely make it private.
Not from here. If they come in, they can always see the members, like they can know their team, but then you can actually divide them into a private channel where they can't see what each other is working on. So they may know that they're in a team with others. So for example, I've seen where people have put them together in practice by their normal, maybe therapy groups that it's the same, like if they were doing small group and maybe we're sitting in that same room and knew each other were in the room, but then have private channels where they were separated of their own individual private channel of the work they were working on to keep that separate. So they couldn't see what each other was working on. That makes sense. The only way they would be able to see that is that it's the initial thing, because you have to have all of those members in the very beginning that are essentially part of that team. But that's the only thing you can keep as far as what they're working on, or any of the information or the files can be separated by making that a private channel so they can't see. And then also in the class notebook structure, this is where we were talking about with the class notebook in these sections. This is the class team, and you can see with this class notebook, this is what it looks like from the teacher side of a class notebook, where you can see, I can see as the teacher, I can see all the different spaces of my students. I can see all my students in here. They cannot see each other. They only see themselves, and then of course a content area. So that's another way that can keep it separate, where they cannot see any of the other people that are in there in that section.
Just a quick question about the OneNote and the collaboration section of that.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep that in your notebook when you set it up, which I've kind of deleted that section because I didn't want kids to be able to collaborate or have that choice to collaborate with each other, to be able to see each other. So if you remove that, then they won't be able to see each other. And basically they'll have their own notebook communicating with you, and you can communicate with them, but not with anybody else.
That is true, and you can also control that collaboration space. So I know OneNote was another area you guys wanted to learn more about. You can actually lock down that collaboration space where they only see a certain section. So you only have, if you ever did want to have a space for either certain individuals or you wanted certain groups to work together, you actually have full control over that collaboration space if you ever wanted to bring that back in the mix and only show students what you want them to see. Or you can do exactly what you said. You can take that out if you don't want it used at all. But there is a way to control that space completely as a teacher. Great questions. So when you're setting up your channels, when you're coming through and being kind of thinking about how you want to set up these channel spaces, like I said, the general channel is this one space that is going to be the area of that becomes the foundation. Is essentially you cannot change the title of that space in that channel that are here, because it's the foundation of what you've created. But however, when you come into each one of these channels that you have here, remember I said it's like a drawer of that file cabinet. You have these tabs in each space at the top of the channel. So we talked about the team that we have, and then we have our channels. The tabs is really where you can add in information to the top and really make these fluid depending on what it is that you want to or what you're working on. This is where you can add in even interactive PowerPoints that are here. You can add in links to Word documents that you have. And these tabs, I always call this magic plus area, because this is how you add the different tabs into a channel space. And when you hit on that plus sign, you have apps that are here that are available. Now, there might be some different kind of apps or that you're using that might be here. There's different partners that Microsoft uses that will add in here. This list is what I created when I had that, when we talked about creating data space, that actually creates just a space to be able to create like an Excel list, like if you're recording data in that app, that teacher only space I was just talking about. But you can see here, this is where you are able to add add in any of the files or information that you have in these different channel spaces that you might want students to get to easily or quickly, or even yourself when you're going through a lesson, or you're going through one of your therapy sessions. One that I know is used a lot is this website area, because that actually allows you to create a URL. So if you have a URL to anything, you can add in a space. So if there's a program or that out, that's going to allow you to even just add a URL space and add a quick tab to that space. So like I use the Microsoft Education site a lot. That it's here, or that, and you can add in a spot that's there. In here, it's a place. So these are my slides here. That's been moved. So let's see, Newsella, I think here. So for example, this is a link to Newsella. Being able to come in and just being able to bring in, you can actually add in tabs. That was just being able to add in this tab into across the top. Now, if I right click on these, they're easy to remove. They can be very fluid depending on the work that you want to create. I want to see if there's a file in here. Okay, so for example, here, there's a file here. I have this Hero's Journey unit. I want to show kind of like the power that's here. This is a Word document that you may be using. Maybe this is a PowerPoint. Maybe this is something that you're using in your session. You actually can come with these 3 ellipses. Now I'm in the file section. I want to back and make sure you understand where I'm at. I'm in this first channel here. We've got our channels, right? This is kind of our team of information. These are our drawers. Each one of this is separate information. I can come into the files information. I'm in the files here. This might be something that I'm going to work on this week. This might be, maybe this was a PowerPoint or that, or maybe this is something I want to use in this week in this session. I can actually come to these ellipses and I can make this a tab, and it will make it a tab at the top here. Now I can even, this is a trick I've kind of done, is I can even rename this. And I've done this before. I have titled these different tabs and changed this where I wanted people to maybe start here, read this. And you can notice it's not going to change the name of the file. The file's still there, but it still gives me a little bit of direction to be able to help students, or be able to help people maybe that I'm working with, what I want them to do. I can even move these tabs. And move them in a different order. I can drag and drop them. But these tabs are what really can save time with being fluid and being able to add in resources and information. So if you have a PowerPoint Live, and I know that was something that you guys wanted to learn more about, as you learn about more PowerPoints, you're able to even just be able to add those as tabs and be able to use these as fluid pieces that come in here when you're structuring your team. With your files and information. Now it's the same thing as a private channel. When I come down to this group 1 and I have files here, I can still add in files. If I have files here, I can create a new file. That's here. It's still the same in that private channel, but it's only going to be accessible to the people that are in that channel. So you can see I had that new file I had. Now I'm in that private group 1. It's a private channel. Those are the only ones that are going to be able to access this. I have the same kind of option. I can make that a tab. And now it might be something that now I might want them to say, am I going to rename this? Because I can rename these tabs. I might rename it and say this is today work for today. Monday. And I'll show you that again, how I renamed that. When you come up to these tabs, like I said before, whenever you come up here, you have this little caret that gives this menu down, or you can right click to be able to get that menu. The settings is always going to be the information about that file, or if it's a URL, so that you can get to that information. but then you can also rename it, and it's not going to change your file name. It's a way for you to even use your tabs in a way to communicate how you might want to be able to add or change in that information. I always say when you're using your tabs, you have your channels set of how you want to separate that information, your working order. So like if you're going to have your certain groups that you want to set up and who you want in those groups and how you want to use it. Your tabs are those fluid pieces that are going to make things very accessible and easy for you to work on, and be able to add that information. Right. I know we're running out of time, so I want to talk about also what are available in channels when you come into these menus of each one of these channels. These channels can also be each one of your channels. You have options in your menus when I talk about your ellipses that you have here. Each one of your channels, you have the option to be able to get channel notifications. So for example, if you want them to notify you specifically, you have options to be able to control that and how you want to get notified when information or posts or things happen in that channel. You can even manage a channel. So for example, these are just the standard channels, but if I want to manage this channel, I can actually turn on some channel moderation, where I can choose who is able to post or add information in that channel. So I can allow members to either reply to a message, I can allow them to pin a channel message. I can even manage who I want to moderate. So for example, if you had maybe some other support personnel or people that were maybe not owners but part of a team, you wanted them to come in, you could actually come in and have them and help them moderate each one of these channels. So you have special permissions within even as your channel, what you're able to do in channel if you want to manage it. If you use the email address for a channel, so for example, if you wanted to email a memo or email any information, this will actually email within the channel. So if you get an email address for that channel, it'll actually email within the channel. If you notice here in the private channels here too, you have that same thing. It will actually just email the information. So if you wanted to post information or that in there, you could actually email a memo or information in that channel for people to get that type of information that are there. But being able to structure in here your channels is really a way for you to be able to set up. If you think about how you want to maybe set up your practice, this is the part that takes time in the very beginning. It's kind of like when you come in, how you might want to structure or set up your channel as far as that environment. So you might have something that's maybe more general announcements that come in, but really being able to use those private channels to focus down on to separating your students that you're working with as you're going through in setting up your team. To add an emoji, last thing I'm going to show you before we go, I'm on a Windows keyboard. If you are on a Windows keyboard, if you're using a Windows keyboard, I know there's also you can also do it on a Mac to be able to do, but when you actually add in your channels information, you can, for example, this is science right here. If I come into these 3 ellipses and edit this channel, I can hit my Windows and then my inside at the same time, and I can add in emojis, which helps with especially younger students. Which helps with younger students to be able to match up icons. To help be able to find that. So that's just another way to be able to add in those different pieces and channels and pieces. So really the important part here is understanding that a team is that team of information, how you put together. You have standard channels and you have private channels. Private channels are going to be a subset of the people that are within that team. That's going to be that private space. in each channel, you have the opportunity to build in these tabs that allow you to make resources really easily for students to get to. You can change these can be fluid, especially if you even post. I can show you in the kindergarten team too. Posting to the channel when you have here, you can even post in information and they're able to add in a channel. So for example, I have our favorite numbers, you can post it and it just becomes clicks for people to be able to touch. Do you have any questions before we go?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box.
Does anybody have any ideas for right now? Does anybody have any ideas for channels that maybe they've set up their team, some ways they found setting up their channels have helped right now with their sessions?
Sonia, do you have something you want to add?
No.
Okay.
This is an example of a team, a special services team that was even just from that worked with a group and just talked about, see, these are more of that general information kind of channels than you can tell here because they do not have the locks, and then it has the private space for people to be able to share more of that collaboration space. Now, this is a general just working team, but that's kind of an example of at that higher level of department being able to use a team. But then just really depending on how it is you want to set up your environment, you can set up a team with your services and then be able to divide up those channels and separate them out depending on, again, I know where privacy comes into this a play. So maybe there might be a place where each team becomes maybe those therapy groups that you're working with, and then within each channel you have a private space even for just those students, with maybe support teachers if that's how you need it.
You do have a question about how do you add files from your documents on the team. Before you answer that, I just want to point out that the link and the QR code for your attendance verification is in the chat box. That will last be open until Monday at midnight, and you will get your certificates on Tuesday. Please, everybody, complete the survey, whether you really need a certificate or not, because this is the way we verify your attendance. And this is also where we can get your feedback as far as future planning and suggestions for topics. So please do that. And one other thing, don't forget that the telepractice training is today at 1. There was some confusion about that, but this time is going to change from now on. The Microsoft tools will always be at 11, and the telepractice session will always be at 1. So just don't forget, because they've got a great thing planned for 1 o'clock. So the question was, how do you add files from your documents on the team?
So when you come into your files, now remember like what we talked about, so each one of these channels is like a drawer, so you can separate each one of your files, right? So once you choose the channel that you want to have those files in, any channel that you choose, you can add files to that location. So for example, if I had certain group 1 files I wanted to add, I come to the Files tab area, because every channel has a Files tab area, and then I've got option to either make a new file. I can do a new folder, a new file, or I can upload, and I can upload actual files that are here. Okay, and then I can upload and be able to upload from that. If I want to, I can even sync information, and that's going to sync maybe information from my OneDrive or that if I'm using it. But there's different ways to be able to add your files to your system to be able to add and upload that way. If you have a file maybe that you want to get from another team, you can even take a file. So for example, if I had this file in here, I'm going to take this Word document. These 3 ellipses next to the file, I can actually even copy it and I can choose another team here. That can I'm going to go back in there. Like I had this file, maybe I have a file in one team and I want to be able to copy it to another working team that I'm using. I can actually go to those 3 ellipses. I can hit copy. And then I have the option here, this little arrow right here is going to allow me to browse my other teams. So if I wanted to send this to another team, I'm just hitting those arrows. You can see my other teams will pop up here. And then I can actually put a copy and make a copy into another team. Let me show you that one more time. I'm in this file. I'm in the files here of this ELA. I'm able to even come to this ellipses. I can copy. And when that comes up, I can hit this little back arrow. That's going to keep giving me a chance to browse my Teams channels and that too. I can come back and I can get to another team and I'm able to move that file. So that means that if I had a copy that I wanted to another Teams, I'm able to do that. Can you copy a channel to another team? You can't copy another channel to another team to go over, but you can when you create a team. You can create from an existing team. So if you wanted to recreate that team, you actually can create a template. So for example, when you join or create a team and you create a team here, you actually have the option to create a team using an existing team as a template. So if you do have a team that you created, so if you have a session team that you have and you want to create that team over again, you can actually create a team using the existing template, and then you can choose that team and it will allow you to duplicate that team with the channels that you have. So if I wanted to, I could do that. And then it's going to allow me to pick the tabs and the channels and that too. Great questions. All righty. Any other questions? So as we come through, this is just really essentially we wanted to talk about how to use channels and tabs to set this up, because as you start learning more about OneNote and using PowerPoint Live and using these files, really being able to add them in the channel as working areas in your tabs is going to help you set up some productivity is how you want to be able to use those of how you want to be able to use those tools and that as you're moving through in your practice. So these structures and that here. With this PowerPoint, I've actually put in and put all this information in here.